Good morning and welcome. You have seen over the past couple months since we've been back in the sanctuary that we have been working through our confirmation curriculum. We have a confirmation class of about 10 young adults that I and two other co-teachers are working with each week. And we've been sharing this curriculum with the whole congregation. And today's lesson that we are talking about is the United Church of Christ, our denomination. And some of you may know that I was raised in the United Church of Christ. Some people use the term cradle UCCer or cradle Presbyterian to talk about from when you were little in a cradle, that was your tradition. And that is true of me, but it is also true that I have a loving Italian Catholic grandmother and a loving Irish, Polish Catholic grandfather, that I received rosaries for a lot of holidays growing up, and I still have them. And when I was about in 5th grade or 4th grade, my parents, who had both gone to Catholic high schools, decided that they wanted to raise my brother and I in a tradition that was slightly different. Slightly. So my mom opened the phone book when we had phone books, big yellow phone books, and she turned to the church section, and alphabetically, the first church was First Congregational Church of Woodbury, a UCC church. And we went to the church the next day, and we never left. My mom actually left her job as a mental health professional with the state of Connecticut to become a Christian ed director and a yoga teacher. And I learned a couple things growing up in First Congregational Church. The first one was to always ask questions. It wasn't always that we would get answers, but I could ask questions about my faith or about my body or about politics. I remember being little up there and asking the minister about Afghanistan. And he didn't really flinch. We just prayed about it as a community. So I learned to ask questions, and I also learned that I could come as I was. And that meant when I was young that I was often not at church because I was playing soccer in New Jersey or Massachusetts, or it meant that when I came to confirmation class, I was really tired and grumpy, but I knew there would be food. So I would come, and sometimes if I had a friend sleeping over the next day, they would come to church too, and my dad would bring us out for pancakes after. So in the United Church of Christ, there's this radical hospitality that welcomes the flies. And I try to explain that to people, sometimes when I'm out at a bar, or a party, or maybe even on a date, and someone finds out that I'm a minister. And one time someone said, "Wait, so you're like the dad on Seventh Heaven, that old TV show, who like thought they were cool, but like you're actually a little cool?" And that was on a date. So I try to explain that, yeah, my church is cool. We ordain queer people, and we've been letting women preach for a long time, and you can come late to service if you want. We're mainline and progressive and sometimes lefty, but people don't always get it. They don't get it until they come here and they see the people There's that little hand gesture maybe some of you learned with the steeple. We've got a big steeple here at Westmoreland. But when you open the doors and you see those people, that's where the body of life comes together. So we often say, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. But beloveds, that's not always true. Sometimes there's a pressure to be here and be perfect and say the pandemic wasn't that bad. And there are small signs that some people aren't welcome here because they don't have nice clothes, or because they don't know when to stand or when to sit or what to do when the hymns are too short or too long. So we have to practice really being our full selves, because in this world there are so many things that tell us we cannot be that. And at Jesus' table, there was likely some Birkenstocks. And we know there were sinners and there were lepers, and there was probably not a drop of perfection, as we'll dine with Judas later in our Lenten season. So today, we come as we are. Going to turn on our microphones. And I wore my Uggs for you all this morning, which are really unfashionable, but are so comfortable. And I have invited members of our congregation to preach with me this morning because we are who we are together. So we're going to do a little bit of show and tell, of talking about what the United Church of Christ means to us and building our communion table far and wide together. So I did not plant Will's earlier comment about the ministers, but I did plant some volunteers in the congregation to help me preach this sermon. So I'll invite those volunteers to come up now. And if you want to grab a seat at that first pew, you're welcome to. And I'm going to share with you all what I brought with me today that represents the UCC for me. So this is some Elmer's glue. In the UCC, we say that we are united in covenant. So that means we are not hierarchically related, but we are together in the promise of God's love of that covenant. So one of my favorite metaphors for covenant is God's good glue. And I think of that glue when I am out trying to be like our Jewish siblings and repair the world with glue. And I think of that when I meet new people who make me feel a little sticky. I don't know why. But I remember that we are glued together. So I'll put my glue on our communion table this morning, and I'll invite Sarah Wilson to share.
So the item that I brought that represents what the UCC means to me is...
When we're online, we really got to use the mic.
Okay. So the item I brought to represent what the UCC means to me and my faith is a children's book about the Amistad, subtitled The Story of a Slave Ship. And as many of you likely know, the Amistad was the ship that carried dozens of African captives from Sierra Leone who had been kidnapped by slave traders in Spain and brought to Cuba. And the captives successfully revolted and ultimately ended up in New Haven, Connecticut, where they were arrested, imprisoned, and ultimately won their freedom through a very famous Supreme Court case in which former President John Quincy Adams represented them. Probably many of you have seen the Steven Spielberg version of the Amistad story, but one of the historical facts that's not in the movie version is the role of the Amistad Committee. And the committee was founded by Connecticut Congregationalists who funded and supported the legal defense of the captives and ultimately funded, not the US government, but the committee of Congregationalists and other abolitionists funded their return back to Africa. About 20 years ago, Lynn Lenhart organized a group of Westmorelanders to go visit the replica of the Amistad schooner that was moored in Baltimore's Inner Harbor. And I went, and I will never forget the feeling of being in that hull, how tiny it was, and imagining dozens of people without adequate food or water or sanitary facilities being rocked in ocean waves for months. So it was a very moving experience. And I think that there's a direct historical connection between that Supreme Court case, which ultimately freed those African captives, and the nomination of the first Black woman to the US Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson, who hopefully will soon be confirmed. And I was riveted, of course, watching her confirmation hearing and the scrutiny that she received, particularly on her criminal sentencing record, and the questions, harsh questions about the nature of her faith, which she admirably demurred and refused to answer. But I was really moved after she was basically reduced to tears by the comments of Senator Cory Booker, who said to her, "Don't worry, my sister, God has got you. I know what it's taken for you to sit in that seat. And one of the things it's taken is the abolition of slavery. And so I'm very proud to belong to a church that has a strong social justice tradition, and part of that tradition is supporting the abolition of slavery."
Wow, thank you, Sarah. This is a photo that probably no one can see, and particularly people online, but it's me, I think, in 1974 or 5. I'm a shepherd with my friends Judy Miller and Betsy Case. I'm not a cradle UCC in the sense I was baptized at New York Avenue Presbyterian Church in downtown Washington, D.C. It's an amazing church, if anyone knows it. And my family moved to Hawaii, and I went to Central Union Church. And my best friends, Betsy and Judy, we wanted to be shepherds, and we were told that girls couldn't be shepherds. And we had an amazing, the version of Kaylee, and I wonder if you know him, I was just wondering, is a minister named Reverend Craig Reynolds. He was a very young minister at the time, because he later had churches in Connecticut, and he said, "Why can't girls be shepherds?" So we were shepherds, and we were so good, like we were sore afraid so effectively that for years we were asked to be shepherds again. And until we got like too big for the costumes, and they were like, "You guys can't be shepherds anymore." So moved back, grew my life up, went to college, etc. Moved here, had children, wanted my children to have an experience like I had, because I'm still friends with Betsy and Judy. And didn't use a phone book, but almost like that. And I went to a Presbyterian church based on geography. And coffee hour, I met someone once who whispered to me that we're a lot alike. We're the two feminists in the church. Shh. And anyway, my kids got to the time for the holiday pageant, Christmas pageant, and my daughter Anna was told that girls can't be shepherds. And I was like, oh, come on, I broke that manger ceiling. Like, we can't do this. So Betsy Case, who's here in the middle, has a twin brother named Bradford Case, Brad Case, who many of you know. And Brad called me up and he said, hey, we have this new minister coming. You should come and like hear what's going on. And so I came here on Tim Tutt's first Sunday, and you had your moment for mission, our moment for mission. And the person who got up talked about the need at the time that Maryland was going to be passing a law, or I don't remember exactly, I look at Doug, on gay marriage, and they talked about how this person had been in Iowa and they had passed good progressive laws around same-sex marriage, and the next day the earth still was on its axis and the light still turned on. And I thought, I think I found where I'm supposed to be. So my kids have been in wonderful Christmas pageants here, and I think about UCC as everyone is welcome and girls can be shepherds.
So I'm Laura, and I also was baptized in a Presbyterian church, but I grew up in the UCC. And in my UCC youth room in Corning, New York, we had like these really, really cheesy decorations that are long gone, but I drew a replica that you're not gonna be able to see. It was this one that was like Jesus wearing like shorts and a t-shirt, and there was this like really comfy couch that was nice. And then there was like this quote that was, "Tell the kids I love them," from God. And then last but not least, there was this like too happy Jesus. Like it was, I think it was Jesus, but it was just like, the smile was too big, so I drew him there. All that is to say, nobody paid much attention to these decorations. And in fact, I was the only one to ask where happy Jesus was when someone came in and like redecorated and, you know, like with something better, like a whiteboard, something nice. But later on, when I was in confirmation class and we were going over the statement of faith, which we just went over, I thought back to those posters when we were talking about Jesus coming, and he's come to us and he shared our common lot. I was like, okay, I have a lot of questions, but I can kind of see, putting the pieces together. In the UCC, something I really like is we don't put anyone on pedestals, for better or for worse, and that can be so frustrating when you're trying to get easy answers, and when you just want somebody to tell you what to do. But more so, it's such a source of strength to know that we are all beloved children, and the Holy Spirit is everywhere, even in, and maybe especially in, the mundane everyday. And I know the Holy Spirit was in that poorly decorated youth room that my friends and I lit up with our laughter. Thanks.
I have a really big object, and I'm Emily, and this is too big to put on the table, so I'm going to lean it against the table. But before I do that, I want to show you all this gorgeous thing. I have 4 things to say about it. First of all, everyone knows it's a yoga mat, right? Look at the gorgeous color of this yoga mat, right? So thing 1 is, church is beautiful. And this gorgeous color on this yoga mat is like, yeah, that feels like church to me. The second thing I want to show you here is this is an extra thick yoga mat, right? See how cushy that is? It's a double thick yoga mat. Now, that doesn't mean that the ground is any softer. It doesn't mean the air is not too hot or too cold. But it does mean I've got a little cushion. And that's also what church means to me. The third thing I want to tell you about yoga mat here, aqua yoga mat, is the point of yoga, at which I'm horrible, is to let you stretch, right? You can become longer, taller, and stronger, grounded in something deep, but reaching for something high. That's what church is too, to me. And the last thing I would say to you about this yoga mat is it represents all kinds of things that I do badly. I'm terrible at yoga. And yoga is all about not judging yourself or anybody else because, as some yoga instructors will say, it's not a competition. And many things in life feel very competitive, but church does not feel competitive to me. So all those things up there that I want to be, I may not be good at them or as good as I want to be, but it's okay because I'm pushing me and I'm not here to judge others, just to do the best I can. So that's what yoga mat means, why it means church to me.
I'm Jeff Egan. I was baptized an American Catholic and engaged with the church in civil rights, anti-war, social justice struggles. Ultimately, the church left me and I left the church. But my family was embraced by the United Church of Christ. They offered us a universal vision that all may be one, an open and a caring theology, and most importantly, a warm welcome of community. This is the baptismal quilt for our son Ben, which is almost 30 years old, presented by Plymouth Church in Milwaukee. And we may have outgrown the quilt, but we have not outgrown the United Church of Christ.
So, unlike most of the other people here, Westmoreland is the only congregation I've ever been a part of, so I can't speak to other churches, but I can speak to what Westmoreland means to me. And so the item I brought today is, it's my dad's shirt. It's a bit too big for me, but it's from the retreat roughly 5 years ago. And so to me, one thing that I love about this congregation and UCC more broadly is the importance that is put on community. To me, part of religion is more than just praying to, God or something. It's about the community. It's about building relationships with those around you. And that's something that I've always treasured about church. It's, every Sunday, as when I was younger, going to the colored rooms downstairs and hanging out with friends and learning about divinity and all of these things as a group and as a community. And that's something that I will treasure for much longer than, specific ideas I learned here. I will treasure the community that this, church fostered for me.
So I'm Doug Hallward-Driemeyer, William's father, and I have grown up and spent my entire life in the UCC. And like others, the thing that most sticks out to me in my experience is the ability to question. The idea that there are no black and white easy answers. It is about struggling to find our way through the gray, in a sense, according to our values. And one of the ways in which that has been especially true for me at this church is the way in which we have talked about sexuality, human sexuality, in all of its many expressions. When Mary and I were first married and looking for a church in Boston, we found a church and were really embraced by it that was probably about 50% members of the LGBTQ community. And when we moved to DC, it was critical to us to find a church that was also open and affirming to people of the LGBTQ community. And so we did the early 2000s version of looking in the phone book, and we went online to the UCC Open and Affirming page and found that Westmoreland had taken that step. And so we came and we certainly found a church home. Within a couple years of our arrival, I was asked to teach the Our Whole Lives course, which is a course for our teens that explores human sexuality. And again, does so without judgment, not about black and white rules, but about what are the values that we try to follow in our interactions. I think Our Whole Lives is an amazingly clever way for the church to get teens to come to church by offering them the opportunity to talk about sex, which is a great thing. But it was opening not only to the students, but to me, in terms of how do I think about these issues? How do we talk about these issues? And I think it was, for me, a big part of my preparation to be involved in the marriage equality case at the Supreme Court, just in terms of how I thought about all of those issues. At the end of the course, we presented the students, the participants, with Changing Bodies, Changing Lives, as a reflection that church is not a place where we take and put part of ourselves away and don't talk about it, but it's a place in which we talk about our whole lives and those values that we try to live out. And so that is something that I very much appreciate about the UCC.
Hello, I'm Nancy Lohman, and I've been a member of this church for about 10 years, and prior to that I was in another Congregational church in another area. And I just love that, the United Church of Christ in general, especially Westmoreland. And one of the things I love is not just the emphasis on social justice, but for me what is so important is the emphasis on spiritual growth. And I've been able to take several classes, many taught by Bob Maddox, who I hope you're listening, Bob, or watching on video. But I've been introduced to ways of looking at Christianity that had never occurred to me before, and to me are so appealing. Bob introduced the author, I'm sure many of you know, Marcus Borg, and this actually here. Meeting Jesus again for the first time has really transformed my thinking. Right now we're also studying After Jesus and Before Christianity, which is very interesting about the different groups vying to survive and vying to be the one that's called the church. And humans are humans, so can't say more about that. And also we explored also the Gnostic Gospels, which can be seen as heretical, but I don't think they are. And it's just so interesting to look at different people, what they're thinking. There's no right, there's no wrong. Just a way to open up your mind to life and to a spiritual concentration. So that's why I love Westmoreland so much. I'll put my books.
So I also have an offering this morning from a virtual participant, Ann Sadowski, who also came to us from a Congregational church in Vermont a couple years ago. And Ann could not be here in person today, but told me a wonderful story via email about a youth pastor that once popped popcorn during the service to talk about how the Holy Spirit makes us come to life, from little kernels into big tasty popcorn. And I was also fortunate enough that when I first came here to Westmoreland, there was a whole box of popcorn in my office that was left over from our greeting team, and particularly hospitality coordinator Janet Moyer, that would invite people to pop back into church again if they were visiting. So double meaning here with the popcorn, both for Anne, who is joining us online, and for this Westmoreland community that is so welcoming. So let's give our preachers a round of applause today. That was awesome.